And, my family has been lucky enough to be in the higher caste system. We're essentials because we're all healthcare workers in my family. But, no one can seem to answer the question for us if it's too dangerous for non-essential people to go to work. Like my buddy who owns a gym, he has to have it shut down. He can't go to work, even though he's surrounded by the healthiest people in the community and he's making the people even more healthy. But meanwhile, my wife and I, it seems to be no danger for us to go to work into high viral loads and COVID infected places. So I found that kind of interesting. All our provinces are currently in some state of lockdown or another. They're in various stages, but we don't have any Floridas or Texases here in Canada, unfortunately. Our Prime Minister is a model progressive, and you may have heard recently, I think Tucker Carlson just did a segment outlining how atrocious Trudeau's latest lockdown internment camp quarantine facilities dictate is. Essentially the way it works is if I were to go to the States right now and not submit to proper PCR testing, I could be quarantined in a government facility. It's not optional. And, until I test negative for COVID. What else is happening up here? Well, our Prime Minister recently told a UN conference that this pandemic offers us a great opportunity to reset and build back better. And of course, he's using all the language from Klaus Schwab vision of 2030, and it's no property, no privacy, and I couldn't be any happier. It was one of the articles on the World Economic Forum's vision of what this great reset could look like. And of course, as libertarians, we know that, yes, a great reset is needed, but the exact opposite of what Klaus Schwab and all these progressives are demanding. Our deputy prime minister, in grand Keynesian fashion, referred to the money that Canadians have in their savings account as a preloaded stimulus. And she asked the public's input on how the government can access this preloaded stimulus, because you see what we need is Canadians to empty their bank accounts and spend to get our economy back. Universal basic income bill was just tabled in Parliament. And so we can expect over the next year, we'll see the details of that. And there seems to be widespread support for something like that among Canadian people. We have at least 10 federal government programs that give out money to people. There's been many people who have been getting over $2,000 a month from the federal government. And we've had virtually no opposition in our government from this. Our official opposition party, the Conservative Party of Canada, only this past week came out with a demand that it's time for a plan to end lockdowns, a plan. And so now's the time. It wasn't the time 6 months ago. It wasn't the time a year ago after, we spent 2 weeks trying to flatten the curve. Now's the time to plan to end it. And, of course, my response to that is you don't need a plan to stop extorting money. You don't need a plan to stop assaulting, stealing, raping, pillaging. You just stop those things. No plan needed. And of course, just like down in the States, in Canada, our biggest corporations are being enriched by this while businesses are being destroyed. Our government is in the process. We have state-assisted suicide in Canada, and now they're extending that to mental illness. And of course, this is handy because we just had a 90-year-old lady in a nursing home several months ago who, rather than go through the terror of another round of lockdowns, she opted to go the suicide route. And so her family was forbidden from seeing her because they might kill her by infecting her with COVID, but they were allowed to be around her bedside when the state killed her. And so it's just an atrocious dystopian nightmare when you combine all these policies together. And of course, there's been talk of a vaccine passport system here for a while. Our prime minister, our government has totally botched the vaccination rollout. Only 2% of Canadians are fully vaccinated right now. In fact, we are accepting extra doses. Biden has sent us like 1.5 million doses of AstraZeneca vaccine. Thanks for for sending us the AstraZeneca. No one wants that stuff, but I guess that's why he's sending it to us. Those of you who don't know me, I am the leader of the Libertarian Party of Canada, which means I'm the guy that, it's a little bit different here in Canada. I'm not the chair of the party. We have a president and we have a leader. And the leader, as leader, I'm the guy that runs for prime minister during the general election. But my day job is I'm actually a firefighter paramedic. So I'm a healthcare worker. I've been on the front lines of this pandemic for the past year. And you know, it was interesting. My experience, I'll give you a little bit about my personal experience going through this as a frontline worker. For the first probably 2 months of this pandemic, of when the government really started scaremongering and started the lockdowns, it's been the slowest I've ever seen healthcare in my 20 plus years as a paramedic. And it really highlights how overused our socialist healthcare system is here in Canada. You know, all the people that would be calling us with their stuck farts and their hypochondria and their stubbed toes and their minor inconveniences that they were too, they couldn't be bothered to Google what the symptoms might mean. They stopped calling us, and it was wonderful from that perspective. But on the other side, we also had some legitimate people with some legitimate medical emergencies that were hesitant to call and go to emerge for fear that they might get COVID. I went to a call, the police called us because there was someone that was high. They were worried about him overdosing. And this guy had snorted GHB, crystal meth, fentanyl, cocaine, and a couple other things. And he was giving me the sign of the cross like I was a vampire. He was more scared of getting COVID from me than he was about the fentanyl that he just snorted. And so that was the mindset of people right at the start of this. It was really driven by panic and fear. And you could tell that all the government's decisions seemed to be along that lines as well. After a few months, I did start seeing some COVID patients, and some of them were sick. Most of them were older. You know, it's not a fun disease, but it was definitely not in the numbers that the media would portray it. You know, the media had us healthcare workers as being overwhelmed and overworked by this virus. And we were overworked to a certain extent, but it wasn't from an onslaught of COVID patients, but more from all the bureaucracy and rules that changed every single week that we had to follow. You know, I remember in one hospital, there was an isolation room for COVID positive or patients who screened positive for COVID, which means they had symptoms that might make them positive for COVID, but they haven't been confirmed yet. And they hired people to make sure you would put your PPE on appropriately going in and out of this room. And if you did one step a little bit wrong, you had to start all over. And they were like, you know, Nazis about this. But the patient, when they had to go to the washroom, could just get up, leave the bed, walk past 7 workstations and 10 patients and go without any PPE on, go to the washroom. So there was just this lot of rules coming down, and all the work and stress was about following these rules. It had nothing to do with any kind of sensible, principled approach to managing the pandemic or managing COVID patients, and everything to do with just following rules. You know, the past year has been a gold mine if you are a bossy person, if you like bossing people around, if you're a Karen. Sorry if there's any Karens out there, I apologize. Line you. But it's been a banner year for authoritarians and fascists of all stripes, and you know, those that work in management and in corporate environments. It's been no different. Now they can really feel useful by handing down all the new rules we have to follow to keep us safe. But in addition, you know, the biggest change I've seen, and it's really starting to pick up now, is what I would consider diseases and emergencies of isolation. There's a real palpable sense that there's a wave that's just starting of despair, loneliness, addiction, stress related things. You know, the number of addicts that have relapsed, people that are just in despair, you know, is growing, and it's very troubling to see. And on top of that, I'm seeing something that I could only describe as a wash of pure evil kind of washing over private society. There have been, I don't want to get into details, but, just in the past few weeks, my colleagues and I have seen horrific cases of child sexual abuse and rape and starvation and cardiac arrest and domestic violence. It has been absolutely horrendous to see. And as I'm watching this, I keep thinking back to my great-grandfather's memoirs that details my family's escape from Stalinist Russia. And he in his memoirs, he detailed how, as the oppression of the state grew, the lineups at the liquor dispensary got longer and longer as people sought to, as he described it, anesthetize themselves from the pain of their existence. And as the state oppression grew, he also detailed how neighbors turned on each other, how they committed violence against each other, and how you had to be more worried almost about the people in your community than you did about the state at a certain point. And so, of course, this as libertarians, we see the root of the problem is that as the state grows, all these social problems and chaos emerge. Our libertarian message has been pretty clear up here in Canada right from the start. We want a completely open economy, no mandated restrictions. We want individuals to manage their own risk. In Canada, healthcare prohibitions are a big issue. And so we want to end healthcare prohibitions. As a healthcare worker, as a paramedic here in Canada, I can't start an enterprise as a community paramedic where I go to elderly, immobile people's homes and address their healthcare needs right where they're at, even though there would be a huge market for that. I can't even do it charitably. I have to, the only entity I can work for is the state. And the state doesn't care about the kind of healthcare I deliver. They care about the quality of paperwork and data I deliver to them. So my job is to write down data and paperwork for the state, and patient care often gets in the way of that because it takes me, close to an hour to do paperwork for one patient I see. And, so to get clear of that call, I need to get that paperwork done. The patient quite often gets in the way of that because they have demands like, hey, can you take this pain away? Can you make me more comfortable? Can I get a glass of water? Can I get some attention? Can you, give me some pain medication? All that takes time. So that's a huge thing here is ending healthcare prohibitions. If, I've got 2 daughters who are paramedics, my wife's an RN. If just my family had been allowed to start an enterprise that utilizing our expertise, we could have unburdened the public healthcare system here quite a bit just in our community and kept people out of emergency departments, kept them healthy. And you multiply that by hundreds of thousands of healthcare workers across the country, you could quite rapidly expand our capacity for healthcare. But of course, these prohibitions put an artificial cap on it. We've said, one of the things we can do rather than hand out free government money is just refund tax money for the past 2 years. What's wrong with just taking all the taxes that people have paid and give it back to them? We stole it from them. Let's give it back to the people. That'll help them, manage through this pandemic. If they feel they need to isolate for a while, take some time off work, do whatever they need to do to keep them safe, that would be pretty handy. We need to end the red tape. Obviously, the difficulty in getting PPE, all these supply managed systems that are centrally managed by government dictate have really hindered our ability as healthcare workers to have PPE at the beginning of this, have medicine throughout, and try different medicines. What's wrong with trying some hydroxychloroquine or some ivermectin or some of these other things? Moderna had their vaccine within 2 days of the genome of the virus being decoded. And that was back in January of 2020. I mean, there are certain segment of people that probably would have loved to try that vaccine when it was even more experimental than it is now. And we could have had this thing out there into market and determined whether it was safe or unsafe by the volunteers that signed up to be the guinea pigs, so to speak. But of course, that wasn't allowed to happen. And so now, what we have is a culture of people that are dependent on, let's say, the FDA for approval of a medicine. And the FDA has suspended its very own approval process right now, so that this vaccine, which is an experimental vaccine, all the tests haven't been done. We don't know what the long-term ramifications are. the FDA says, well, it's okay in this case, but in all other cases of life-saving, potentially life-saving medicine, that's not okay. But people, you know, we're enculturated now to rely on these organizations to tell us whether it's safe or not. They're violating their own standards. They're not holding, you know, and this dependency has stripped us of our personal responsibility to look and determine for ourselves whether a medicine is worth the risk or not. We don't have that in us anymore as a general rule, as a population. In Canada, it's really bad. Like, no one knows how to manage their own health because it's completely outsourced to the state. So like I said, anytime someone has a little bit of belly pain, a stuck fart, they call 911 because it's a free ride, and a doctor can tell them, oh, here, take some Tums and everything's all right, they're there. Doesn't matter that it costs the taxpayer $5,000 for that little visit. So responsibility has been completely outsourced. We want to end corporate welfare, of course, and we want to end the Bank of Canada. You know, the Bank of Canada, central banking has made us very brittle and fragile. It's a completely fragile economy. Over the years, artificially suppressed interest rates have caused Canadians and Americans to spend, consume. We haven't saved anything for a rainy day. And obviously, if we had a proper banking system, people would have savings and they would have some resilience and be able to deal with this. All right, so how do we get this message out? What is the real problem here? And I think this is worth clarifying, because, you know, there are kind of two routes we can take in the Libertarian Party. One is to focus on collecting votes, and the more votes we get, we can see that as a metric of success. Another metric of success is how many people have we persuaded to be libertarians. That's the method I choose, and I'm going to explain why I'm willing to trade votes to win hearts and minds for liberty. And I'm going to do it by starting by framing this problem with a story that has happened to me. Years ago, as a fire lieutenant, I was charged with going into a burning building. There was a fire on a 4th floor apartment, and I had to take my crew up there and do primary search and rescue and fire suppression. So we get up to the 4th floor. I see smoke chugging out of out from under one of the doors. We bust the door down. We enter this apartment. And as we come through the smoke and into the living room, I can see that there is a motionless body naked on a couch. It looks like a dead person. I didn't understand how anyone could be alive in that environment. And as I got closer to this, I saw that it was a large, obese lady. She probably weighed about 350 pounds. She was naked. The evidence of her addiction to immediate gratification were everywhere. So there was empty liquor bottles, empty Doritos bottles, empty cigarette packs. There was Dorito just crumbled up in her corpulent fat folds. And I went down and pinched her trapezius and yelled at her. And to my surprise, her eyes opened. So she was alive. And I said, "Ma'am, we got to get out now. Your apartment's on fire. Let's go." And she kind of looked at me, and she noticed that there was a firefighter behind that mask leaning over her, kind of nose to nose with her. And she's like, "Come here, honey." And she grabbed me and brought me, and she wanted to have a makeout session right there on the couch in the middle of this life-threatening event. So I pushed her back and said, "No, ma'am, we gotta leave. Your apartment's on fire. Let's go." And she pulled me in again, and I pushed her back, and I'm like, "No, we've got to go now." And then her attitude totally changed. Now she no longer wanted a makeout session. She realized she wasn't going to get her way in that moment. And she gave me the finger and said, "Fuck you." Well, I don't know if it's safe to admit it here, but I think I might have violated the NAP guys, because I grabbed her and hauled her forcibly out of the apartment, out to safety, put a blanket on her, and called for EMS to come out. And I don't know about you, but I grew up watching this show called Rescue 911 with William Shatner. And quite often the brave men and women would get a barbecue afterwards after they saved a life. Well, I turned around to her and she said, "Fuck you," with the most venomous, as I went back in there to try to save her apartment and her stuff. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is what it's like being a liberty activist. We know exactly what the emergency is. We try to tell people that there's an emergency, and they fight us at tooth and nail. And, you know, on one hand, if we're libertarians, we could look at that situation and say, okay, the proximate cause of this situation is the cigarette in the mattress that caused this fire. The fire is the cause. We just got to put out the fire. That is the problem here. It's the fire. But that's like blaming the bullet, in a sense, for the gunshot, or the gun for the gunshot. The cause of the root cause is what we're looking for here. How could this have been prevented in the first place? What led to this? What led to this life of chaos? I mean, this was an inevitable event at a certain point. This lady had obviously been addicted to immediate gratification, whether it was food, booze, cigarettes. She was on welfare. And so there were people enabling this kind of behavior. And she continually outsourced personal responsibility. And this was inevitable. There's got to be a place back in time where an intervention would have stopped this chaotic life from happening and this fire from ever emerging. And that's what I'm interested in discovering here, because you know, the proximate cause that we see right now is government oppression. But what is the root of that cause? What is propping that up? What is causing it? And I would argue that it's statism. It's the belief system that people have called statism that supports government. And statism is the real pandemic that we're fighting as libertarians. It's a pathogenic idea. It's a pathogenic meme wherein we outsource our personal responsibility to the state and demand that they use violence to immediately gratify us and alleviate our anxiety. And of course, the result of that is a feedback loop where the growth of government results in more chaos, which results in more anxiety and more demand for government action. And that, to me, is the leverage point. That's what we need to hit as libertarians. This is a public health crisis called statism. And for years, libertarians have been doing our best to inoculate people against this mind virus. And we've been having some success, but it's been fairly limited. But this is a beautiful opportunity. We have, in a sense, almost a natural immunity emerging right now, because people in general are tired of the state oppression that we're facing under this lockdown. And so my focus up here in Canada is to really focus on the key metric, on the key thing, which is one heart and mind at a time. Are we inoculating people against the mind virus called statism? And in my opinion, there are more effective ways and less effective ways of doing that. And this has been born out of trial and error and falling short of my standards and you know, just years of trying different tactics. And one of the things I've learned over the years is that just being unrepentantly radical is probably the best thing. And that doesn't mean we have to be jerks about our messaging. It doesn't mean we shouldn't empathize with our audience and meet them where they're at and try and craft our message in language that they'll understand. And of course, you know, a conservative audience and a left-wing audience, they speak in different languages, and it's good to know what that language is and connect with them. But we shouldn't try to soft sell liberty, and we shouldn't try to say, you know, to hide our principles or to hide our radicalism. It's radicals that are determining the narrative on the stage. Justin Trudeau, Joe Biden, Donald Trump, these guys are figureheads. They are telling the audience what they want to hear. And the audience wants to hear the message, you know, that radicals are saying. So it's not those guys that are determining the cultural narrative. It's the radicals, the people that are unrepentant about their ideals and their principles and are unabashedly shaming them, or unabashedly sharing them, that are determining the cultural narrative. And it's also the state that's determining it as well. And the state will always, you know, so we're up against it because the state will always support the cultural narrative that results in state growth. And this is why mainstream media and universities and everything that benefits from the state growing in size support this narrative as well. So we've got our work ahead of us, but right now is an ideal time. And I'm gonna stop there. I've got a bunch of tips for persuading, communicating, talking to people. If you want to follow some of these tips and follow some things, you can go to my website, timmoen.net. You can sign up for my newsletter, and you know, I hope to put out a bunch of content there that can help us, because I think right now is an opportune time. But I'll just kind of stop right there and take any questions maybe, or if there's time.
Could we request the Canadian National Party invade and take over our nation?
Well, I've often said, joked when I speak at U.S. Libertarian conventions that when I become prime minister, I'll annex the U.S. and bring you proper liberty as bequeathed by Her Majesty the Queen. But that doesn't go over so well. So.
Okay, go too far there. I lost us on that one too. Yeah, that's great.
Other questions? I'm going to stand over here so you can hear me. I did, being in the medical community here, you probably face an uphill battle with the white coats. I'm just wondering if you have any personal stories where you've imparted liberty on somebody's heart within that medical community during COVID. Or any tips or tricks you can give us when, you know, really attacking the root, which is the
yeah.
Right now.
Yeah, well, thanks. That's a great question. You know, I try not to proselytize too much at work. Everyone knows I'm the leader of the Libertarian Party. It was kind of a humorous curiosity at first. But more and more people now, my coworkers who follow me on Facebook and social media are talking to me about this. And most of my coworkers agree that the lockdowns are terrible, that all these mandates are terrible, that we need to get back to life as normal. And they ask me about liberty and all that sort of thing. So I guess my advice would be, you know, try not to proselytize too much. And a lot of this comes from, actually, you know, I have an evangelical Christian background. Now I went to Bible college and it kind of turned me into an atheist. But there's a lot that I can take from my training as a young evangelical, because, you know, as an evangelical, your job is to try to win hearts and minds, and, you know, being a witness, right? Living your principles down to the core is the best way to shine your light. And so when you live an authentic life and you are a person of integrity and character, and you're an attractive person in terms of the way you live to people, they're more inclined to actually approach you and ask you more about this philosophy that you subscribe to. And it's a beautiful philosophy. I don't think we should be shy away from it. And of course, I always interject little comments, you know, when I'm waiting for 4 hours with a patient in a hallway to you know, get seen by the doctor or to get a bed, you know, and they complain about the line. I say, well, yeah, this is the bread lines that socialism gets us, right? We get a 4-hour line and we get a stale loaf of bread at the end of it. And sorry that this is happening. And they kind of look at me and kind of think about it and nod. So, you know, I try not to be too overt about it. People can see for themselves that this isn't right. And, you know, I don't think you should hide your light under a bush, but I don't think you should be in people's face about it either. And, you know, be ready for those questions when they come, and try to be as empathetic as you can with the people. You know, like I had one guy come up to me the other day, one of my coworkers, and try to say that communism seems like a really good idea. And, you know, your first instinct is to slap him upside his head and just own him, right? But he's coming from an authentic place out of curiosity. He hasn't done the reading that you or I have done. He hasn't studied into it. He just, you know, even my great grandfather in the beginning of his memoir, he said this idea of communism seemed like a good idea. It followed his Christian Mennonite ethos of of sharing and looking after the community. That seemed like a good idea. And of course, he saw how evil it was towards the end when it was actually implemented. So I simply patiently explained to him and addressed all his concerns and addressed all his things about, look, if you're a communist, property is theft. They say rent is theft. And he says, I do. I'm like, yeah. So if you're renting your house to someone, you can use violence to stop theft, right? That means they can use violence to remove your property from you because they think it's theft. And, just simply explaining this to people and has been really helpful. So, yeah, I don't think you need to walk around there, wearing a Gadsden flag everywhere and saying, don't tread on me, and I'm a libertarian in 1776. And, but don't be shy about telling people how you came to liberty either, or wearing it on, letting people know you are a libertarian. It's not something to be ashamed of.
Questions? Yeah, I'll ask a question. Thank you very much, Mr. for talking to us today. I guess my question is kind of curiosity. Have you found? I'll just start by saying, like, I was shocked, and many in here were shocked by just how unresisting a lot of Americans were to the idea of potential lockdown. Have you found in Canada that the people at large have become more skeptical, more resistant over time over the last year, or have they bought into the?
So I think the question is, have people become more resistant over time to the lockdowns, or was it specifically about the vaccines?
No, it's the lockdowns.
Okay, to the no, almost everyone universally, except for a few of us odd libertarians, seem to be in favor of some lockdowns if it'll stop this pandemic. And of course, we were out on the front line saying this isn't going to be temporary. They're not going to want to give up this power easily. Even if this was 100% fatal, we shouldn't be locking down. We should be letting people manage their own risks and figure this out. If I can go to work, why can't Joe, my neighbor, go to work? What is, like, none of this makes any sense. And we were looked at like, and a few people even said, there's no, just like there's no atheists in foxholes, there's no libertarians in a crisis. The whole philosophy is being revealed to be weak and ineffective and not able to meet an emergency. And of course, over the past year, that rhetoric has gone away. And now I think the last I heard that 70% of Albertans in my province favor completely reopening the economy now. So that was a far cry, and only 8% of them are saying that we need more restrictions until this thing is done. So that's an encouraging sign. Now, I think the thing we have to be careful of is, just like there's variants of COVID escaping, the danger here is that we have variants of statism escaping. So there's a lot of populists that are against the lockdowns, but they aren't firmly rooted in the philosophy of liberty. And so, for example, we have a few famous activists up here that are very good at being civilly disobedient and getting, being, I guess, courageous in the face of oppression and inspiring people to stand up. But, they're doing things like trespassing. This one guy recently went into a grocery store, refused to wear a mask. They asked him to leave. He said, no, it's my charter right, my constitutional right to be here. And he grabbed some soap that he wanted, and they wouldn't sell it to him. They didn't want to sell it to him. They told him to get out. So he threw $5 down on the cash register, said, I've exchanged my money, this is mine. And of course, as a libertarian, we'd say that's theft. And then he assaulted the security guard that wanted the soap back and wanted, and so obviously, that kind of activism or that kind of messaging is antithetical to liberty. And if this guy were given the reins of power, it would be very different than if libertarians were given the reins of power. And so I think that, we have to be a little bit careful here about some of the I guess, fringe populists that might get attached to this movement. And, I think our duty right now is to outshine them. You know, I don't think that criticizing them is the best approach. I don't think that we should rag on them too much. But I think we need to outshine them with our message so that people understand the philosophy of liberty. You know, these are what's happening right now is that there's a meltdown of conservatism. Conservatism historically has basically been anti-left. You know, there was a quote by a pastor from 1870 that said, American conservatism is just the shadow that follows radicalism to perdition. It always acquiesces. And that has been the case for the past 100 years. I mean, the modern day version of that is Michael Malice's quote, conservatism is just progressivism driving the speed limit. And part of the reason for that is that they accept the same premise as the liberals, and that is that in a crisis, we need the government, right? And so one of the things I was going to say in my talk here is never accept that premise, because this is the premise of both conservatives and liberals. It's of all the statists that in a crisis, we need the government. And so if you ever find yourself debating these facts, debating case fatality rates, debating vaccine efficacy or safety, debating facts about climate change, if you ever try to find yourself convincing that 9/11 was an inside job, or trying to convince people that we're being ruled by a cabal of adrenochrome addicted pedophiles, what you might as well say is, if I'm wrong about these facts, then government intervention is necessary. But because we're run by a bunch of adrenochrome addicted pedophiles, we can't trust the government. Well, no, liberty isn't contingent on any of those things. Even if everything the mainstream media says is true. 9/11 happened exactly 100% the way the mainstream media said. Vaccines are completely 100% safe and effective. That still doesn't justify vaccine passports. Even if the case fatality rate were 100% immediately, it would not justify any restrictions or lockdowns or mandates. Even if the world is ruled by super well-meaning people who just think that government intervention can do the greatest good, government is still evil, even if those people are running it. And we have to stick to those guns, and we have to stick to the principles. And no one else understands that except libertarians. So it's our duty, I think, to really make the strong principled approach to liberty, and not make liberty contingent on whether COVID is a hoax, or liberty contingent on whether vaccines are 5G control mechanism or something like that. We have to really stick to the principles, and now is the time to do that, and outshine all the voices that are making cases for liberty on the shoddiest of grounds. Oh, liberty is, we need liberty because vaccines are 5G. Okay, well, what if it's not 5G? Do we not get liberty then? We had one member of parliament here who said, well, I don't believe in vaccine passports because vaccines aren't effective at stopping the spread of COVID. Well, what if evidence comes out tomorrow that it's highly effective at stopping the spread of COVID? Are you now in favor of vaccine passports? We're against it no matter what. And that's what we have to go with.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think the question was, what should you be looking for in leaders? What kind of qualities? I've followed American libertarian politics very interestingly, because I've been asking that same question, like, what leadership characteristics should I have? What's the most effective way to be a leader and to stand up for liberty and advance it? And, so I was interested in the Johnson and Weld campaigns. I'm like, okay, here we have some mainstream kind of Republican guys that have some real street cred, and that they've been in the belly of the beast, and they're soft selling liberty and being very careful not to piss off the establishment, and that sort of thing. And I thought, okay, maybe this is the way. I don't think that's the way, though. I'm not convinced that's the way. I think, over the years, my first libertarian platform was not that radical. It was a 15% flat tax. I looked at it like, okay, what could a libertarian government realistically do in 4 years in government? And let's just think about this honestly. Like if we had a mandate from the people to roll back government, what could we do? And I said, well, we could lower the tax rate to 15% flat tax. We could get rid of this. We could get rid of that. Well, our platform now is borderline anarchist because I've come to see that's not the best way to sell liberty, because we're kind of hiding our principles behind trying to look appropriate in the establishment somehow and think through these things as if we're a beltway think tank, and that doesn't connect with people, and it doesn't grab people by the lapels and say, hey, this is fucked, we need to do something. So now our policies look, so I would say, I would want to see, like, I really like Joe Jorgensen. Obviously I think that there was some messaging faux pas there. Maybe her social media team wasn't altogether on it. And I can understand where some of that comes from. You build a team around you and people come out of the woodwork and say, I can help. They're very ambitious. They want to move ahead, and you give them the reins to a certain portfolio, and then they're not living up to your standards. You don't want to just fire them, but at the same time, you want to be effective. It's a difficult job. So you really need a leader. I've learned to develop a spine over the years because I've been in similar situations as Jorgensen, where my party people, my director of communications and different people weren't putting out great messages that I would feel comfortable saying. I wanted more direct and, confrontational messaging or just more direct messaging, principled messaging. And it wasn't in the tone or the manner that I liked. It was soft selling liberty and trying to be think tanky, and it wasn't me. And so over the years, I've developed more of a spine, and I'm holding my people, I'm telling them directly what I like and I don't like about messaging and trying to coach them a little bit more. Right now we have the guy who runs our Twitter account. He's a young guy who's pretty based. I mean, he crosses the line a little bit on some of the tweets, I think, but he's crossing the line in the right direction. He's making sins of commission rather than sins of omission, right? I would rather have my guys get out there and be a little bit messy and step over the line and maybe make the odd, like I saw what the Kentucky folks did, and I would rather make errors that way than errors the other way of not saying anything at all about it. Even though I would have a talk with my media guy and say, look, let's rein it back a little bit. That crossed the line, but I would rather have, and so it's really tricky. So you need a leader, I think, with that's willing to run the show and willing to be principled and willing to hold his people accountable and get what he wants. Because ultimately I was elected by my membership to deliver the message and be as impactful as possible. So they put the trust in me. And it's not always easy to have all that much confidence in yourself, because the more you know you don't know. and so I'm never 100% sure that I'm doing the right thing. But I have to act boldly with courage and have the humility to change course when I'm wrong about it. And so I think that's what you want in a leader, someone who's not afraid to act boldly, not afraid to commit sins of commission, rather than a leader that is afraid to commit, is committing sins of omission because they're too afraid to act. One thing I've learned, and this is true of firefighting as well, it's better to have a leader that makes suboptimal decisions than to have a leader who's paralyzed with fear, not making any decisions. And because you can always correct course. So I would look for someone who is not afraid to get messy, not afraid to get out there, someone who's principled, and ideally someone who can unite people. One of the problems we have as libertarians is that we're so busy fighting each other that we forget to fight the state sometimes. We're so intolerant of minuscule views and who said this and the drama. And I just think if libertarians can take a page out of the Republicans or Democrats playbook a little bit, like we don't have to be total Kool-Aid drinkers here and get behind our presidential candidate 100%, but it always disappointed me to see libertarians criticize presidential candidates, even Gary Johnson and stuff like that. It stung me a little bit. Maybe it's because I'm in their position and I'm constantly getting criticized. That could be it. Maybe I'm biased here, but you know, I just think what could happen, like you think of all the gaffes that Trump made and all the silly things Hillary said, and their supporters would take everything they said in good faith, as if, oh, they didn't mean it the way you guys are interpreting it, and they would defend them to the death and say, you know, and like I think back to Joe Jorgensen's tweet, or what our media team put out about it's not enough to be not racist, we have to be actively anti-racist. And okay, at first blush, that doesn't look great. But it took me 10 minutes to go into and listen to her full speech, in which that quote was pulled out of, and see the context was 100% libertarian and pretty hardcore. And it referred to state power and the racist things the state has done. And it would have been very easy to defend her if that was your first instinct, and go to the mats for her, rather than just, whoa, that's terrible. Okay, bad candidate, can't support her. Going with Trump, going with, you know, libertarians can never get things together. And I just wish libertarians could find a gear where they would defend each other and have each other's backs in the face of stress and controversy and stuff like that. And I think we could get a lot more accomplished if we could tolerate each other and defend each other, and take each other in good faith, rather than immediately assume the worst case scenario about something someone says. So those are some of the qualities I would look for. I would want a leader that tries to unite and see the good in people, and defend other libertarians, rather than cut libertarians down. And you know, it just hurts me when I see that happen. You know, I wasn't a big fan of seeing Sarwar go after Tom Woods and some other people and all that infighting either. So yeah, I guess that's what I would say about that.
This has been super awesome to have you here, and we hope to come visit you soon, or maybe we'll keep our eyes out for the smuggling underground railroad, libertarian swing, across borders. So thank you for zooming in with us. We're inspired by what you do. This is really great.
Well, thanks so much for having me. And if any of you know any coyotes that can smuggle me across the border for the state convention, I'd be there in person.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
We have two in person.
We have,
Yeah.
do that too.
But first, tacos and that free, you're paying for enough for everyone to have another plate. So go, please, get another plate. Throw two of them away, I don't care. Yeah. Yeah. So thank you, speakers, for being patient.
Yeah.